Coming up next.
My compass had been women. Like literally my compass from so much of my
Yes,
life
I
had
am
been.
so glad you said that because for the women in our audience, a lot of times their compass is men. If
Yeah,
I can please the man, if I can follow the man, if I can submit to, in a Christian understanding, if I can submit to the man, it will all be okay.
yeah.
And what was your experience with that compass?
It's somehow it never worked out.
It
So
was
weird.
broken.
Yeah. It
Welcome to Faith Over Addiction podcast, where the chains of fixing and striving are broken and joy is rediscovered in Christ. You're here because you know there's more for you, a life beyond addiction's chaos, rooted in God's peace and promises. This is the place where Christian women like you learn to release the weight of fixing and striving and instead lean into God's strength to create a home filled with love, grace, and hope. She is clothed with strength and dignity. Proverbs 31:25. That's you. You may not feel like it yet, but you are stronger than you know. And God has so much more for you than carrying someone else's addiction. Here, we'll uncover how to set healthy boundaries with love and a little humor. Find resilience and grace in the messy moments of life. Celebrate small victories and embrace joy like never before. Lean into God's promises for restoration and strength because He's not done with your story or your loved ones. This is your invitation to rise up, embrace your worth in God's kingdom, and take back what's been stolen by addiction: your peace, your joy, your future. Your faith is the foundation, and your boundaries are the bridge, and God's truth is your guide. I'm Tanya Gioia, your host and fellow traveler on this journey through the chaos of addiction. I'm here to cheer you on, equip you with tools that work, and share the truth that's changed my life. The joy of the Lord is your strength. Nehemiah 8:10. Together, we'll uncover how to create safe, loving space for healing, starting with your own heart and home. By setting boundaries, trusting God's plan, and embracing His truth, you can reclaim your joy, your peace, and your family's future. Then you will be able to stand firm for your family and legacy as a kingdom daughter, a woman who can laugh at the days to come, knowing her identity is secure in Christ. So grab a cup of coffee or tea and get comfortable. Let's walk this journey together. We're about to take back what's been stolen, create a safe, healing space for you and your family, and rediscover the joy God has waiting for you. Welcome back to Faith Over Addiction, where we help women regain their identity in Christ while they are loving someone who is struggling with addiction. Today, I have David Richards with me, former Marine, author, coach, part of corporate. He has done it all, and he has had some crazy experiences that have led him to faith based on what could be seen as tragic and unforgivable. So, David, why don't you jump right in and give us some of the real meat and potatoes of what happened to you in your early life?
Tanya, thank you so much for having me on first. So it's a pleasure to be here. I grew up in the military, so my father was a career Marine, and growing up on military bases, it's something of a surreal experience because it's its own enclosed universe in a lot of ways. Like everyone's family is in the military, so there's a very throwback sense of safety because crime is virtually non-existent. People leave their houses open, doors open, cars, everything. Um, and for 4 years, we lived off base when I was growing up. So from kindergarten to third grade, we lived in a little town called, it was little back then, called Hyattsville, Maryland, just outside of the University of Maryland. And it was wild because everyone, obviously, different houses. People didn't. My dad was the only kid or the only guy in the block who was in the military. And this was, of course, in prehistoric times, back when the Vietnam War was just ending. So this is a very unpopular time for the military because of how the war was broadcast and received back in the States. And my best friend was a kid named Danny, and he had two older brothers, one who was the same age as my older brother, Larry, who was 9, and then their older brother David was 12. And Danny and I were 6 at the time, so this is probably when we were in first grade. And Danny used to get into these fits of rage. We called him a spaz. He would just spaz out, and you never knew what was going to cause Danny to spaz out. And one day it just so happened, because there wasn't helicopter parenting back then, that as 6 year olds and 9 year olds and a 12-year-old, we were wandering the streets of Hyattsville, and we found our way into a stranger's backyard. There was construction in the backyard, and I think like the doors of the back were being put on. Maybe the house was under renovation or something. And so we're playing for a while there, and there happened to be a hammer on the ground.
Mm.
And at one point, Danny's oldest brother David said, "It's time to go home to eat." And Danny got set off. Like, his face went red with anger, his eyes bulged, and he just didn't want to stop playing. And this is how it was going to come out. And I think before anybody could react, he had picked up the hammer. And so his his middle brother Matt said, "Run!" And so we all turned to run. And I remember there was a screen of green bamboo separating the houses, separating the yards in this particular neighborhood. And I saw the green bamboo, and then the hammer hit me in the back of the head, and I was out.
Oh my.
And what the memory that I'd blocked out until the pandemic was the fact that I remember his watching his brother carry my body from outside my body. So I was about 15 feet behind them, and they were walking back to their house, and it was a very kind of a very gloomy scene. I couldn't get back into
Right.
my body. Um, And then the next memory I have is Danny's at my house, and he's been crying. His tears are all blood, or his eyes are all bloodshot, and his mom's there, and he bought me a coloring book, and then we went on to be friends again. But my life took kind of a weird turn. I became very temperamental myself and very emotional myself in a lot of ways after that. And what's neat about that story is just through my own journey of faith, especially over the last 5 years, I reached out to Danny in January to say, "Hey, I don't know if you remember me," and he did. But I said, "I just wanted to say thank you, because what happened when we were 6 actually started my journey of faith." Because when I came back to that memory during the pandemic, I realized not only was I having a near-death or out-of-body experience, but it certainly gave me a concrete sense of spirituality.
What transpired between between age 6 and then the pandemic, which was just 5 years ago? Did you have a sense of God, or was it a struggle just to hang on to being a human?
I so around the same time, probably before the hammer incident, I had a download that somehow a woman was going to lead me back to God. And it was a very romantic kind of like, it had this chivalrous idea. Like, so I could watch Snow White or Cinderella or Sleeping Beauty. I'm like, oh, that love exists. Like, that's kind of like, this is gonna be awesome. And so that was kind of, even after the incident with the hammer, that's kind of how I championed my way into life. And I started writing poetry to girls when I was like 9 or 10. I got rebuffed by my first girl when I was 10, who thought I was weird for giving her poems. And I was like, oh, unrequited love.
Yeah.
Uh, and this was actually a time when we lived in, so again, being in the military, we lived in Japan. So we lived on the island of Okinawa, Japan. And so that was a wild experience. And then when I came back to the States for high school, I realized no one was buying the kind of romance that I was selling. Like, no one wanted this chivalrous, noble, pure idea of love in the age when people were figuring out hormones and sex and driver's license and freedom.
Right.
And so, and I grew up in a Judeo-Christian home. So we went to church all the time. We were Methodist. Um, and I had this very, I think, limited sense based on understanding. I implicitly understood the beauty and the truth of Jesus's story. Um, but as I grew older and from moving all the time, I started to resent my father because he was the one making us move. And
Mm.
this is well before the time of FaceTime or texting. So I was leaving friends that I was never going to see again. And
Mm-hmm.
the emotional disruption that created, and this sense of sadness and loss, I then started to direct towards my dad. And so when I got to college, not only did I realize I need to switch up my game so I can attract more of the ladies.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but I also started to realize, I had gone to school here. I graduated high school at Camp Lejeune, the Marine Corps base here on the coast of North Carolina, and my graduating class was like 108 people. And then I went to Penn State University, and the student body there was 35,000 people. And there's people from New York and Philly and Pittsburgh and New Jersey. So a completely different experience. And I remember my freshman year that there was a one of my professors was a naval officer, but he was also religious.
Mm.
And I said, "Hey, can we pray together?" And I remember we prayed, and I was just like, "I don't feel anything. Like, I just don't
Mm.
like I don't have this sense." And so I knew as my freshman year started that I am moving out into the waters of life. Like
Mm-hmm.
I'm leaving the tested and calm waters into something extravagant. And um, I still had this keen sense of this one person, right? This one woman. And then kind of at Penn State, it was like, okay, well, how am I going to recognize her? Like, and so I would just through hormones, through connection with people, and didn't find her, but it was kind of fun trying. Uh,
Right.
and
Well, let me pause you just a second.
yeah,
What did you do with all this grief about moving? Did you ever begin to process that, or what did you do with that grief?
yeah, I don't, I would say honestly, I didn't really process it until I got into the military.
Mm-hmm.
And it wasn't processed directly. And in fact, to kind of, well, I'll fast forward it here in a second to answer the first part of your question about God. Growing up with, growing up in a Judeo-Christian environment, there's all that's the sense of morality that I had.
Mm-hmm.
And in college, I realized I am drifting away from the true north of what that is. But I also feel like to fit in, at least with the people that I wanted to fit in with, I needed to let these parts of myself go. And when I got into the military, it was all men.
Mm.
So my class of officers was all men, and there were some manly men. And of course, when you're going through training, it's all about you're kind of like thumping your chest. It's like who's the bigger guy, and very quickly it became apparent that we had one guy who was like, I mean, built like the Rock, and
Mm-hmm.
he was like the guy. And he graduated first in our class, and everybody respected him. He was prior enlisted. Um, so then you get out into the operating force, and now and some and also some context, what I came to realize certainly after the fact was as much as I hated moving growing up, now I was doing it for a living. Now I was getting paid
Right.
because that's what I was doing. And at the same time, that gives you a very transient view of life because you're moving every 2 to 3 years. Well, my first experience in the actual operating forces of the Marine Corps was I went to Somalia as part of the initial landing force. So I was
Oh my goodness.
23-year-old leading Marines ashore in Somalia. And even though it was a very low, intense combat experience, it's still a very intense experience. And so I got back, and now you have this sense of, oh my gosh, life could snap
Short.
like done any minute. Let me find someone to marry, and let me kind of, and I'll figure it out that if I make it the person, then it's going to work out. And so I met someone, I think like 2 or 3 months after I got back from Somalia, and within a year we were married. And like the
Did
day,
she fit that notion of the woman who was going to bring you to God? Had that
uh,
faded?
it hadn't faded. I assumed that by finding someone and then getting married and blessed in a church that it was all just going to happen. Like it was all just going to
Okay.
happen. And I remember the day we got married, I'm like, this is a mistake. Like, and it's,
Um,
yeah, and you're just like, well, maybe it's I've never done this before, so maybe it's just jitters. But again, it's this compressed time cycle of trying to to build the stability.
right.
And so we moved across the country to South Carolina, and I was just like, this is she was Catholic, and we couldn't agree on that, um, and so I ended up like forcing myself out of the relationship, and by forcing, I became unfaithful because I was like, this isn't it.
Hmm.
And then I had to deal with the psychological implications of that. Okay, now you've broken something that was blessed in it. Like, okay, now what are you going to do? And that took a while because I also had a daughter, and that was a lot of pain and struggle. And for about 6 or 7 years, I stayed single. At the same time, I realized I don't want to live my dad's blueprint for life. And my dad had done 31 years. I was at 15 and I decided to get out. I got out. I got into corporate. I met someone who had no background or exposure to the military, which was fantastic. We started dating and we got married a couple years later. And that relationship, I got probably 5 years into that relationship. I said, God, this isn't it. Like, this is just not it. And so I did the same thing. I got out of that relationship. I forced myself to get out of that relationship by becoming someone I didn't like. And I was drinking at work to deal with the physiological changes I was creating with myself, the stress that I was inducing in myself, and got into a relationship again. That relationship took me to the end of 2019. And what was different was in 2017, I started going to Tony Robbins events. And if you're familiar with who
Yeah.
Tony Robbins is, he'll say he's a Christian. He doesn't he basically tells people, I'm not here to tell you to believe, that's completely up to you, but whatever you believe you better practice. And he'll only use a few things from the Bible. He'll say, seek and you shall find, um a Saul to Paul moment, or the truth will set you free. And that's really, but when you really look at his work, there's an underpinning of the story of Jesus to it. So so I had started coming clean to my family about like being unfaithful. Like, and that was
Hmm.
really, my daughter now is 22. I told my mom, I told my parent, my uncle and my aunt and uncle. Um, and so even though this relationship was now coming to an end after 3.5 years, I had this weird sense of optimism. And I took that optimism into the pandemic, not knowing obviously that there was going to be a pandemic.
Right.
But in the very first few months of the pandemic, I had some spectacularly wild experiences akin to Neo in the Matrix taking the red pill and going
Yes.
down the rabbit hole and being like, oh my gosh, there is a real divine presence in the universe, and uh, the architect behind that is Jesus Christ. And that was what my first 2 or 3 years of the pandemic, or the first 2 years of the pandemic, were like for me.
So you did what a lot of us do. We seek out relationship fulfillment to fill the God hole, or we
Yep.
seek out accolades, or, like you said, when you're a Marine, you could be in a near-death experience, which gives you the hype, which gives you
Yeah.
all of these things that set off that. I don't know if it's a sense of well-being, but a sense of purpose. Then went to corporate for a sense of purpose. Then had, this shifting of, in each one, it was, I need to get out. I need to get out. What made you pull things out of the darkness and start telling your mom, telling your aunt?
Yeah, so it was actually 2017 was a huge year for me. I went to so I to start the year off, to finish 2016, someone had given me a whiskey and yoga t-shirt for Christmas. Actually, the woman I was in a relationship with, because I loved Scotch at the time and I had been teaching yoga since I got out of the Marines. I got into yoga, and it was cool because yoga for me gave me a sense of oneness, a sense of internal oneness that I didn't find in Christianity. That's one of the observations I have of how Christianity is practiced is there's a lot of resonance about this biblical story and not necessarily application about how you bring that to life within you, like how
How
you
you
go.
live the narrative, how you
Yeah,
actually
exactly.
practice.
Yeah, like
Yeah.
it, and so it's like, what does it mean to actually pick up your cross daily and follow Christ? Like, what does that really mean? And that's what my latest book is about, becoming one with Christ. But in 2017, so I also started reading Think and Grow Rich
Mm.
by Napoleon Hill. And if people haven't listened or read that book, he interviewed. So this book came out in the 1930s, I think. He interviewed 500 self-made millionaires in the United States to ask them what their secret to success was. And he was talking to like Vanderbilt. He was talking to Henry Ford, to Thomas Edison, to
Carnegie. Yeah.
Carnegie. Yeah.
Yeah.
And most of them confided to him, and some very explicitly in his writing, that said there's an infinite intelligence in the universe, and it's been gifted to the West in the form of Christianity. And when you connect to that, that's how you make things happen. And it's basically, if you've heard of the law of attraction, that is pulled from Jesus's praying as if what you're praying for has already been received. So that
As
is
long as it's already in the will, right? So you have to know the will first
right,
to be able to pray for the thing.
right,
Because if you're praying for destruction of other people, he's
right.
not going to just give you that
Well, yeah,
because you
and
prayed
so
for it.
yeah, you kind of have to embody his two commandments, right? Love the Lord your God, which is the vertical commandment, and love others as yourself, which is the horizontal, and together they form the cross, right? So I mean that's his commandments. And so when you embody those commandments, then you're praying from a place, obviously you're going to pray for the benefit of someone, not for someone's destruction. So in 2017, after reading that book, and I honestly I didn't even read the entire book. I read the first two chapters. And in the first or second chapter, he says, "What is the purpose of your life?"
Mm,
And when I read that, I was blown away. It was like this, it was just like almost like a lightning bolt. It was like my life has purpose. Like there's a compass that I can
hmm.
come back to. And I think the big shift for me was my compass had been women. Like literally my compass from so much of my
Yes,
life
I
had
am
been,
so glad you said that because for the women in our audience, a lot of times their compass is men. If
yeah,
I can please the man, if I can follow the man, if I can submit to, in a Christian understanding, if I can submit to the man, it will all be okay.
yeah.
And what was your experience with that compass?
It's somehow it never worked out.
It
So
was
weird.
broken.
Yeah, it was. Well, and that's part of the journey too, is you realize it's about becoming whole, and that's a much more psychological experience. That's where I've studied a couple books of Carl Jung and listened to people like Dr. Jordan Peterson, and the anima in a man is the feminine aspect of a man, and that's
Hmm.
that's also the pathway to the subconscious mind. Well, what does anima mean? It means the soul.
Mm,
And
hmm.
so for me in 2017, when I had this epiphany I got published when I was in high school. I got a short story that was published in North Carolina, and it made national recognition for National Scholastic Magazine. And so I wanted to be a writer.
Wow.
Yeah, I wanted to be a
Wow.
writer um, for Hollywood or be the next Stephen King because I like horror stories, but not knowing how to do that. Obviously when I grew up, the world wasn't as connected as it is
Sure.
today. And so the,
Sure.
the vehicles for how do you become a writer or how do you do these things just weren't out there. And so I went to Penn State, English major, but I knew I was going to join the military. So when I got out of the Marines in 2006 for 11 years, I wanted to write horror stories, Stephen
Mm,
King.
hmm.
And I would write about 100 pages of a manuscript. And then between work and yoga and my second marriage, just doing all these things, I just couldn't make it work. And after about 3 or 4 weeks of trying, I would just get so frustrated and then I'd go away from it. And this went on for 11 years. When I read Napoleon Hill and found out about my purpose, I said, that's it. I'm going to write a book about helping people find their purpose in life. And I wrote my first ever purpose statement on a notebook. And that year I published Whiskey and Yoga, my first book about finding your purpose. At the
Hmm.
same time, as I was writing in February of 2017, we went to a wake for my uncle. My mom's brother had passed away in Colorado. And I had also had the idea that I wanted to do the Tony Robbins thing. I hadn't done that yet. And I did 2 Tony Robbins events in 2017. But we're at this wake in Colorado, and my brother lives in Colorado, so he was there with his wife, or I think he just came. My aunt and uncle who live here in Raleigh were there, and I got really just blind, stinking drunk. Um, no food in me, and
Mm.
we're driving back from the wake, and I just told my mom everything. I said like I cheated, I did this, I did that, because the truth will set you free. And
Absolutely.
Uh, and I remember we stopped at the 7-Eleven and I got sick because of just horrible situation. And I remember waking up the next day and my uncle's like, you told your mom everything last night. I'm like, I know. Like, and there was a tremendous amount of shame, right? Because there
Right.
was like, I finally come clean about this, and now I'm going to come clean with it to my daughter, and that like, and so there was this tremendous pain that created that. And then I came clean with the woman that I was in a relationship with, and that was kind of the nail in the coffin, even though that nail didn't get shut. or the coffin didn't get shut until the end of 2019. But it was just this intrinsic sense that you have to be honest with yourself. Like it's not about anybody else. Like you have to own that relationship. And you ultimately you want to live, you want to be happy with the being that is inhabiting this body 24/7. Like you really want to do that. And so that was 2017 was the beginning of that. And then in July, I went to my first Tony Robbins event, UPW in New Jersey. And then December, I went into my second one. So those were probably the three big catalysts, finding my purpose, publishing my first book, and then the Tony Robbins events. Because at the Tony Robbins events, people might look at his advertising and see it as just hype or it's just like dancing or yelling or whatever. It is so physiological. It is how you change your nervous system to adopt new beliefs, to adopt new values, and to bring them, to bake those things into your nervous system so they become part of who you are. You're not wrestling with them at an intellectual level.
Mm, mm. It was more than an intellectual level, though.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
How were you beginning to connect with those emotions that had sent you in directions away from Jesus, away from God?
Um, just through a process of elimination, because so think about it. I would say the download happened when I was 4 or 5, because for me, my imaginary friend growing up was Jesus, like the
Mm-hmm.
voice that I talked to, like that voice. If you've ever seen a child have a conversation with their imaginary friend, like where I remember seeing this with my last relationship with her. Like I think the daughter was 6 at the time, and she was cleaning her room, and I was getting ready to tell her to get ready for school, and she's having this conversation. I was like, that is so cool because she is talking to like, and that was where I received this download that a woman's going to connect you to God. So didn't find it in high school. Laughable approach in high school because
Right.
people, college, I've obviously got some kind of game, and yet it's not producing this result. So it must be adulting. So I military, first marriage, nope, not it. Let me kind of tear myself apart to get out of this. Second marriage, several years later, nope, not it. More investment now. And of every relationship, I was bringing more of me, because I thought initially this is who I am.
Mm-hmm.
And what I found, I think to a point that may resonate with your audience, was I was surrendering myself to try and be what I thought the other person was looking for in a relationship.
You were a
And
reflection of them instead of a reflection of Jesus. Is
yeah,
that?
yeah. Well, and that's precisely it, because if you're a reflection of Jesus, then you see everyone as a reflection of Jesus. And
Uh-huh.
that's how you connect at a much more deeply spiritual level. But in the absence of that, what ends up happening is you surrender yourself. And a friend of mine up in Boston did the same thing, where she was trying to be the savior in a relationship. She would go with men who were broken because she wanted to try to be the one to uplift them. And what ends up happening is you surrender yourself, they fall in love with this version of you because it's wonderful and amazing. And oh my gosh, you're everything they could ask for. And then you come back into the picture, not
Mm-hmm.
not the part of you, because you surrendered, and that surrender said, well, let me come back and inhabit my being again. And then you're like, oh, this isn't the relationship I'm after, because this person has these things. And so but it was almost like, and I don't mean this lightly, but it was almost like I was a mad scientist. I was like, okay, let me
Mm-hmm.
try something now. Let me try online dating. Okay, let me
Mm-hmm.
try dating someone that I near work. Okay, let me try, and all these things, and nothing would work. And finally, in the last relationship leading up to the pandemic, I got into it. I'm like, well, maybe at first we connected really well. She loved football. She loved the same music that I listened to, and she didn't believe in God. And I thought, well, maybe that's I haven't tried that, because everybody I've been with has some sort of spiritual component to me.
So
She
you're
was,
letting go of the childhood vision that a woman will save you. So, in a sense, this is going to sound weird. In a sense, you're releasing enough to let God in.
yeah, absolutely, absolutely. And the relationship was, it reflected I remember at one point she said something about like, you don't really believe that. Like, you're too smart to believe that stuff, aren't you? I'm like, you're too smart not to. Like,
Yeah.
And in some ways it was, and we're still really good friends. She's married now. She's got a beautiful relationship. Um, but in some ways I had to get to that place. Like that was the place I had to go to. And it'll tie into a second. We can talk about King David in one of the books because King David writes about being in the pit. Well,
Yes.
where does Christ meet you? He meets you in the pit a lot of
Yeah.
times. And you look at that, that's what Napoleon Hill says that as much in his book is that oftentimes it's through these hard times that's where we meet Christ. And if you look at the story of Sylvester Stallone, he had to sell his dog for food before he got Rocky. Oprah Winfrey was raped by her abuse, sexually abused by her uncles, I think, or family members before she built her media empire. Tony Robbins lived in his vehicle before he built his billionaire empire that he has now. So there is a value, and part of that value is you have to strip away all the stuff that's not you and not part of Christ. And that is the transformative fire of the Holy Spirit. So
What
as
do you think? What do you think the key is there? Is what I hear you saying is you have to strip it away. You have to work through it.
yeah,
It's not the other person.
right. It's yeah. Well, and this is great. One of my coaching clients, she was in a relationship and she didn't want to leave the relationship, but she was so frustrated by it. And I said, well, tell me about it. And so we were talking, and she has a really good paying job, and her boyfriend, who is I think actually a fiance, they were talking about when they were going to get married, but he uh, decided 4 or 5 years ago that he didn't want to work anymore, and he
Mm,
was going to go become an amateur golf, like a semi-professional golfer, and go on the amateur circuit. And so that had been his plan for the last 5 years. And I said, well, okay, so what does he do all day? Well, he golfs and he gets high, he smokes marijuana, and and I said, okay, and you're paying the bills? And she said, yeah. I said, what a life. Like I would love that life too. Like if I didn't have a drive, I don't have to do anything. I can get to play the sport that I love to play. I'm not making any progress towards it because I'm getting high, but oh my gosh, that's great. And she kept waiting for him to change. I was like, it's not about him. It's about you. Like
mm.
when do you hold yourself to a higher standard that I deserve more than this? I deserve better than this. I am better than this. And it was beautiful because I want to say 2 months after we stopped working together, she left him and like did her own thing. And I was just like, and it is, you realize, it's what Gandhi said, if you want, be the change you want to see in the world. And if you want to change the way someone responds to you, change how you respond to them.
What in your perception was so 5 years? What in your perception was she getting from that relationship that held her in there? Because it's as a great coach, you ask the great question, what had she been kind of simmering on for a long time to be able to hear the question?
I think initially there was real chemistry, right? There was real chemistry, there was real attraction, and and then what ended up happening was he would almost make her feel guilty because now it became obligatory. Like,
Mm,
well, I have to, like he can't support himself. Like, what am I supposed to do? How is that your problem? Like,
mm.
I realize what you're saying. He can support himself. He's put himself into a position where he's not going to. And so now you are nurturing him because there's a codependency that's been created and you're perpetuating that. And whenever you start to feel the idea of I want to break away, guilt comes in. And maybe he even pushes and feeds that guilt in you a little bit. And so the sense of abandonment that you would be fostering by looking out for yourself keeps you in the relationship. And that's what she had to untangle.
I see that. How, for a woman who's raising kids, choosing to stay home, take care of the family, I can see the difference. Walk us through the difference of a decision made. They obviously made the decision together, but a decision made together where there is forward movement versus a decision made together where there isn't forward movement.
Yeah. So where there's forward movement, there's trust, right? I mean, when you have forward movement, then there's communication. And and this is such a great relationship to use in contrast to that because she would talk to him about the things that needed to change, and he would acknowledge there were things that he needed to change. And that's all he would do. he would
Mm.
so there wasn't progress. There was the semblance of progress. It was almost like this political sort of thing. Like, I know I need to stop smoking marijuana. I need to really get my, I think there's milestones that you have to go through to become an amateur golfer. I know I need to do these things. And so that would placate her for a while. And then it was the realization that that's all he's doing. He's
Is
not,
speaking the right words,
yeah,
but
he's
not
not,
taking the
there's
action.
no action, there's no pull through. And when you have mutual agreement and you have that trust, you're seeing pull through because then there's a willingness to, in some ways, it's a willingness to submit yourself to the idea of you're not out to improve me. I'm here to learn from you by my interaction with you where I need to improve or where I need to grow or where I need to change. And that's the basis of a healthy relationship. If we can sit and say, gosh, the way you spoke to me really caused me some frustration or confusion or anger because it set these things off in me. Oh, I appreciate you sharing that. I didn't realize that I was just really in a tense situation. It's when the conversation is productive instead of counterproductive. It's got to be where each person is giving verbally and that verbal communication leads to action or change.
Yeah. The iron sharpens iron concept of,
Yes. Oh, there it is right there. I've got it in my wristband. A friend
oh,
of mine, a
nice.
dear friend of mine gave that to me. We can talk about that here in a second. Yeah.
The iron sharpens iron, and that marriage is also one of the places where, our relationships, one of the places, any relationship, where we can help the other one become more holy, not in an ugly, mean way, but
Right.
in a loving way, to say, oh, I have a real problem with tone when I get upset. And my family has been kind enough to share that with me.
Right.
Say,
Right.
hey, what are you angry about? Because your tone's coming out really angry. Well, let's come back to David and his pit and
Yeah.
your
Yeah. Yeah.
relationship with King David.
So so we the last relationship in 2019 and we had shared a house together that she owned. Initially, we are going to buy it together, and then this was when I broke a pattern in 2016 about I'm not going to get out of this relationship, even though don't think it's the right one. I'm going to become more in the relationship. And so I made that change, but she owned the house. We'd split the bills. I had just gotten promoted at Cisco, the IT company where I worked over the summer, and so I could have gotten my own place, but I was just like, I need to process, like, I need to process me because I hadn't processed divorce number one, I hadn't processed
Mm,
divorce number two, I hadn't processed infidelity, I hadn't processed the damage that I'd done to myself and the sphere of people around me,
mm-hmm.
and so I moved in with family.
Mm,
And I said, and I was working on my second book, The Lighthouse Keeper, which was going to come out in March of 2020. And I had an idea for my third book. And I was really excited about that because I realized that as painful as it was for this relationship to end, it was the right thing for it to happen because had been built on shoddy foundation. And so I'm living with family, and I've got this woman at the gym became a really good friend of mine, and she was almost she's 15 years younger than me. Husband is almost 20 years younger than me, but they became friends. I went over to their place for barbecues, and really, so I had a good support network with my friends as well. And I started working on my book in January of 2020, my third book. And I was initially going to call it Being. And it was initially about our fascination with social media.
mm,
I would go to Starbucks or I'd go to Chipotle and everybody's head is down on their phone. And I was just like, to what end? Like,
right.
where does this take us?
Right.
Because this is really fascinating. Um, and my friends had set me up on dates and I went on a couple dates, but I'm like, you know what? Like, no, no.
Right. Not
I
here.
want to clean this situation up a little bit. However, to soothe my ego, I started following beautiful women on Instagram
Mm-hmm.
because that seemed like a mature and responsible thing to do. And I want to say it was in February. For some reason, it always comes back to February. And once you start doing that, then the algorithm starts sending you beautiful women onto
More
your
and more.
page, right?
Yes. Yes.
So,
Yes.
and then it's like, oh my gosh, every day can be the Sports Illustrated swimsuit issue. This is ridiculous. Um, but there's this one day where this French woman popped up, and she was a school teacher, but she was also a semi-professional bodybuilder. And I
Mm,
remember her. her picture was her lifting up her shirt and showing off her six-pack abs and then pointing at them. And I, beautiful, stunning woman. And I wasn't going to follow her because I didn't seem like I didn't feel worthy. Like she was just like, this is too clean. Like she's too respectable, and I am not.
Mm.
Um, but there was something in her eyes that struck me. I said, okay, I'll follow her. So then the pandemic happens, and amazing. I was going to Santa Barbara, California for a mastermind with Jack Canfield, the author of
Mhm.
the Chicken Soup for the Soul series of books. And there were supposed to be 17 people show up. Six of us made the trip. So, I mean, I flew to Charlotte and then from Charlotte to LAX. It was a plane for 250 people. There were 20 people on the plane. I was the
Wow.
only person wearing a mask. It's surreal. Then you land in LA, and I was stationed out in Southern California, and I'm familiar with LA traffic. There's no traffic. So I'm driving up to Santa Barbara. It's surreal. It's almost like a movie. It's like, oh, this is crazy. Like
Yeah.
this is crazy. Um, and if you've never been to a mastermind, the idea behind the mastermind, and it's again coming out of the law of attraction, Think and Grow Rich, is that when you bring minds together, they automatically produce a third mind between them. And it's the idea, I
Mhm.
mean, that's what a relationship is. And so the idea for the mastermind is Jack has sold 500 million copies of his books. He's had tremendous success speaking around the world, serving at a very high level. He's going to impart his wisdom to the people who participate in the mastermind. And so I wanted to talk about my this idea that I had for my third book, but they wanted to talk about the lighthouse keeper. And so I told them, and I said, "Oh my gosh, I've been trying to conquer love. That's been my life's journey, is trying to conquer love." And my last relationship, I wrote the woman at least one poem a day for 6 months.
Mhm.
Sometimes it was two or three poems, and I thought that relationship, that's because I was how determined I was, and that relationship ended in November.
Mm.
Um, and so I went through my spiel. I talked about my book, and towards the end of it, Jack said, "You've got a year." What?
A year of what?
What does that mean? I just like, okay. And I finished. Um, and at the same time, I'd started to get into Dr. Joe Dispenza, if you're familiar with
Mhm.
Joe Dispenza. So he wrote a book called Becoming Supernatural. And really quickly, and then I'll get into King David. So he has taken the art of meditation and scientifically applied how people can do it. And again, it's a very nuanced, but also into an elevated approach to Jesus's pray like you're praying, like what you're praying for has already been received. Um, and he has had people cure themselves of cancer, cure themselves of Parkinson's, cure themselves of traumatic brain injury. And they can scientifically document that his meditation practice helps people downregulate cancer-causing proteins and upregulate healthy proteins. So
Mm.
it's not just googly goop, it's I mean it's this is like real science using a very esoteric practice of meditation that goes back thousands of years. So I started getting into those meditations, and I got back from the mastermind with Jack, and I was gonna write, start writing my book, and we were working from home now. And I did one of those meditations on Tuesday, March 31st, 2020. And I was in the bedroom of the guest bedroom of the house that I was staying at. And I did the meditation, and the ideas of the meditation is you pull your conscious mind out of your body, and then you go into the quantum field, and that's where like the oneness exists, like the intellectual. I guess if you think of it as Christ, it would be kind of the logos, the
Yes.
divine order of creation and reason. And I had this download for like 45 minutes, and it wasn't specific instances from my life, but it was basically my life review.
Mm.
And it was all these themes about why life hadn't worked out. It was all coming back to love. And it was a very discreet messaging. And I came out of the meditation. It was like 9 o'clock at night. And I said, I just had my judgment day. Like that was my judgment day. Oh my gosh. And then I'm like, okay, so the pandemic, end of my last relationship, Jack Canfield thing. Now my judgment day. Wow. Okay, this is intense. Um, And so fast forward to that Saturday, and instead of writing my third book on my Mac, I decided I'm going to write it in a journal because
Mm.
I didn't journal a lot because I'm a lefty and I always my chicken scratch writing, and I just that kept me from developing my own sense of self as a writer. And so I was writing it. It was very cerebral. It was like this text message between two voices. One was the voice of being, and one
Mm-hmm.
was the voice of doing. And the being voice was feminine, and the doing voice was masculine. And it was really, really intense. And some point in the afternoon, early afternoon, I took a break and I pulled up Instagram. And this woman, this French woman who's a school teacher I followed, was had posted an image, and she was standing in a black dress in a field of golden wheat and looking off in the distance. And it was her most, in some ways, because she has an extraordinary physique, but it was her most almost humble picture because it didn't show anything of her physique. It was just this black dress. But within seconds, I'm like, I've seen this picture before. Like, I know I've seen this picture before. Not that she's posted it before, but I have seen this picture before. And it reminded me, if you've ever seen the movie Gladiator with Russell
Mm.
Crowe, it
Mm-hmm.
reminded me of Russell Crowe's wife because, and wheat in the movie plays such a strong, there's such a strong symbolic, and wheat, obviously, Jesus talks about wheat in the Bible as well. And so in that moment, I committed to say, I'm going to write a picture about this picture. I'm going to write a story about this picture. Like, this picture's inspiring. I'm not going to write about what I was going to write about with social media. And and it was wild because instantly Jesus was a part of it. Like, I inherently understood, okay, this picture, this woman is the person that I've been looking for my entire life. Jesus, this is great. I'm happy. Get out of my way because I have found the woman I've been looking for my entire life. And Jesus didn't like that. Um,
Not surprised.
I so I got to and I didn't there was no sense of the King David element to the story just yet, but I got to actually July 4th of 2020, that weekend. Uh, I was now living with my friends from the gym. This woman had said, "Why don't you come live with us?" Because I think she had almost a foreshadowing that I was going to go through something very traumatic during the pandemic. And so I was living with them. They had just bought a new puppy, so we're all like friends with the puppy. And obviously, there's so much time on our hands now because everything's closed.
Can't do anything.
Yeah, but that Friday of July 4th weekend in 2020, I went to my mom's house. My father passed away in 2008, and so my mom's been living here on her own since then. And I cried. I just broke down and cried because I'm like, is I what I basically realized was I intellectually understand the story of Jesus. I do not emotionally or physically have the conviction that his story is true.
Mm.
And the ultimate kind of realization of his story is true is the belief in everlasting life, because obviously it's the whole story hinges on the fact, like, I mean, Paul says in Romans, if Jesus hasn't been raised, then your faith is futile. It doesn't matter. And so in July 4th, that year, I realized I'm picking up my cross, and what is it going to take for me to be absolutely certain of Christ's victory over death and sin? And also there was, I mean, I'm also now processing all the shame of my life's journey. And
Sure.
I'm obsessed on the beauty that I see in this woman in France. And so I'm trying to say nice things to her on our Instagram and her social media. So fast forward to 2021, and I've been reading the Bible. I've been reading different books. I've been reading about psychology, about quantum physics, history, and having these extraordinary experiences. And a lot of those experiences came at Tony Robbins events. I'd also been trying to figure out, what is this book? Like, I have this book, I have this woman, I have my life. How do I all box this into one thing?
Mm.
And I'd gone through, for me, part of my writing quirk is I can't write the book or the manuscript until I have the title, because the title is the book's first outline. Like, some people write their work and then they title it.
Right.
Wisdom Yoga, I knew right away. I wrote about the lighthouse keeper, my second book, in Whiskey and Yoga. So as soon as the idea came for me, it came to me in I think it was Christmas of 2018 when I got the revelation that, oh, Lighthouse Keeper, that's my second book. But I knew it right away. I went through hundreds of titles. I wasn't writing on my computer now. I was just journaling my experience of the pandemic, what I was, my faith, what I was trying to reconcile. And in November of 2021, I was so frustrated because also I'd been looking at, I wasn't just looking at Christianity, I was looking at Judaism, I was looking at Islam. I'm like, they're all connected.
Yes.
They all have their origins in the Garden of Eden. I mean, they all have this starting point of monotheism, which is Judaic in nature, right? I mean, Jesus is Jewish. He's not a Christian in the sense that we
No.
think of him. And um, and then there's this woman, and I was like, this woman is like she is like the Virgin Mary to me. Like that's how beautiful, that's the beauty that I'm seeing in me. And I was so frustrated because I couldn't come up with this title. So finally in November, I remember asking myself out loud, I'm like, what is this? What is this that I'm trying to write? And the thing that came back to me was love letters to the Virgin Mary. And as soon as I said it, I was like, that's it. That is it. So, and I was thrilled because I was going to Date with Destiny, Tony Robbins' December event that he does every year, which was going to be virtual because of the pandemic. So it's all Zoom. And I had committed now, I was going to take the rest of December off to write love letters to the Virgin Mary. Because now that I had it, I'm like, this is awesome. So I had the King David thing too, and it was based on Luke 132, where when Gabriel tells Mary that your son will be called, will be son of the Most High, and the Lord God will give him the throne of his father David.
Hmm.
And I was like, David, Mary, Jesus, all in one thing. Beautiful. So I go to Date with Destiny, and I'm not I'm struggling. I've since moved out with my friends because I said something like, once I had this woman, I don't want to be stuck with you guys. I'm gonna go, and they're like, no, you're gonna leave. I was struggling with drugs because trying to process that this was all actually happening during a pandemic and it was happening, I was experiencing this was at equal times euphoric and terrifying.
Sure.
And uh and then I had these wild encounters with Tony Robbins, and I'll share this one because it's the most I'll share two, but this one was the most impactful. So on the last day of the event, it's a 6-day event. Tony had just shifted to Zoom in 2020 with the pandemic because it's his mission to serve. So you have 50 people in a Zoom room. You've got 4 or 5 people from Tony's staff who are in the Zoom room guiding it. And there are 50 Zoom rooms at this event. So there's about 2,500 people from around the world. And you're in one of these Zoom rooms with these 50 people. And on the last day of the event, and I had shared, you have to write a questionnaire kind of explaining why you're coming to Date with Destiny. And I poured all of this out. And Tony reads every one.
Mm.
He literally reads every one that people will bring up to his attention. This is one you need to read, and I'm pretty sure that mine was one he was going to read because of what I'd said in it. Because I talked about this woman, I talked about King David, I talked about the pandemic, and on the last day, I said, "Does anybody want to share?" And I said, "Yeah, I'll share." I said, "I've been working on something for the past 2 years that has terrified me. I've looked at the world's great religions, and it's forced me to grow so much. And I'm writing a love story between King David and the Virgin Mary." And everybody's like, "Oh, that's so beautiful. That's really cool." And after about 30 seconds, someone from the staff sent me a DM on Zoom and they said, "Tony wants to read your book when you're done."
Wow.
Yeah. And initially I was like, "Yes, did it. Oh my God, this is awesome." And then after probably, I don't know if it was later that day or the next day, I'm like, how did Tony know to be listening when I was speaking out of the 2,500 people, the 50 Zoom rooms, that he was listening at the exact moment I said what I was speaking about?
Yeah.
And I was like, that's Christ. That's
Yeah.
Christ. So I wrote the first draft of love letters I finished it on New Year's Day of 2022. And then I went into kind of a spiritual PTSD over what I'd written because one of the things that Napoleon Hill also says that whatever you can conceive of, if you believe, you can achieve. And so I
Mm-hmm.
had conceived of something that was really terrifying and daunting in terms of terrifying and awesomeness. Um, and I struggled and I started struggling at work, and it was a kind of all this was catching up to me. And I knew by the end of January, I knew I have just sealed my fate with Cisco. Like they can see that I'm clearly struggling. My boss can see it. And I've tried to hide it, what was going on. Um, but at the same time, like at some point you realize this isn't
So
like
you're struggling with your living arrangement, with drugs, with the existential crisis, with what? I mean, what exactly with your belief in Christ? What
it was the
exactly is Cisco seeing?
There's more to this conversation. Head over to part 2 to keep listening.